course here. Fantastic. Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, absolutely. Mm. Yeah.
So I'm going to run silent in a second, so obviously you'll need to do instructions for both Avril and for Resh, and then kind of lead from that point on.
I'll do the introductions.
Yeah, so I'm going to be completely silent on that, and just make sure everything's
Let
working.
me know when I can start.
If there are any massive tech problems, you'll see me waving around, but you can just keep going because I'm recording everything as well as streaming it.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, we're going to start in about 45 seconds, roughly. Just at a guess, I'm just guessing off the clock. Just so you're aware, in terms of like any questions that are typed in by the audience, the delay I've set to, it's about 20 seconds at the moment. That's in case anyone says anything really terrible. Just like
How are the questions? Oh, okay.
So I can see the questions coming through
You can
the
see
chat
the
here,
questions,
and
okay.
I'll just ask them to all of you. So you can hear me much clearer than the mic can. The mic can barely hear me at all,
Okay.
hopefully.
So you're going to ask questions from the
If
YouTube.
if anyone asks any pressing questions, I'll kind of pass them forward to all of you. So we're going to go offline and then go back online again.
Okay. Hello everyone, I am Anna Despina-Tudor from London College of Communication, and this is our Real Lives podcast, VR Ethics and Agency, Conversations on Immersion, Accessibility and the Democratization of VR. Real Lives is a festival of screen and sound reflecting on how people coexist in modern society. This festival is on until the 13th of February, and we'd be very happy to have you here at London College of Communication at our next events in the coming weeks. Today we have two guests, Avril Furness from Furness Films and Resh from AKQA, who is joining us remotely from New York. Welcome both.
Hello.
In this podcast, we'll try to look at some of the hot topics in VR, such as giving VR a distinct voice in the media landscape, ethics in VR content production and consumption, as well as accessibility. But before we delve into these topics, tell us a bit about yourselves and your current work in VR. Resh, would you like to start? Resh? Hi. Wonderful, thank you.
Hi, and thank you so much for having me. My name is Avril Furness, and I am a virtual reality independent filmmaker and creative writer. And I've been working in this space for just over 3 years, coming up to, well, 3 and a bit years. And I've been exploring 360 video, virtual reality, and producing independent films over that time period, exploring human stories, really, and essentially trying to, exploring what human nature is within that VR space.
Okay, so what made you become interested in virtual reality?
So I was really taken by this video game that I saw, and it was in Wired magazine, and I read an article about it, and it was a very hard-hitting subject about cancer, but it was a video game, and it was called That Dragon Cancer. And what really kind of struck me about that particular game was that such the medium was so unexpected, to actually play a game and to be talked through quite a viscerally difficult and taboo subject. And so the idea of using a medium which isn't really used for that specific thing to explore what that story is about really struck me. And subsequently, at the time, my partner at the time had an Oculus Rift development kit.
Yes.
And I was like, well, why can't, that's such an interesting thing. Like, how can I take, quite hard-hitting, morally interesting, ethically challenging subjects, and use a different medium which might actually open it out to a wider audience, and get more eyes on it, and actually generate more interest, because the medium itself is so young and so new, and just explore different ways of telling quite hard-hitting stories in a different medium. So that's how I kind of got into it.
Through the empathy machine, in a way.
Yes, well, it has been branded the empathy machine, and I have made a film called The Empathy Machine. Virtual reality, it was a bit of a buzz term. I think Chris Milk coined
Yes.
the phrase because of the sort of incredible ability and the power of virtual reality to literally transport the viewer and put you in the shoes of someone experiencing something very, very different and something you've never experienced before. And certainly that's kind of what I discovered in my first film that I made, The Last Moments, which literally transports the viewer into the shoes of someone having an assisted suicide. And so the transformative and transportive powers of virtual reality are just absolutely incredible. And I really went on to explore that transportative kind of power in my last film, which I made with the International Committee of the Red Cross and
Yes.
Google, and really gave viewers the opportunity and the chance to see firsthand what it's like to live like a Syrian refugee, and what happens at the moment that they're under attack from armed militia from outside their home. So I've been able to really sort of explore incredibly sort of interesting but very difficult social stories within this medium.
Yeah, absolutely. Resh, what brought you to VR?
writer, theatre, and just even indie developers in their bedrooms coming up with really interesting ideas for the use of the medium.
It's interesting that you mentioned challenges before, and just like Avril, it seems like a lot of people have started VR by just being passionate about the technology, and I assume it's been quite a long journey. I mean, a lot of trial and error and figuring out how it works and why it works. So if you look back at your own histories, what advice would you give to someone who is new and wants to use VR creatively? Where should they start?
Shall I go first? Gosh, I mean, there's so much I can say. I mean, I feel like I'm really learning myself, and every project that I undertake, I learn. I treat everything from scratch, and I really have to learn because the technology is changing so drastically that, for example, the camera that I used on one of my recent films no longer exists. I mean, the technology has just come along in leaps and bounds. I was in Las Vegas in June last year, and I shot a film with 3 different cameras, 360 cameras, in the tunnels beneath the city of Las Vegas. And so it was a real kind of reportage documentary style virtual reality experience where I put the viewer in the shoes of someone who lives in the tunnels beneath the city. There are thousands of homeless people who live in these flood tunnels, and it was a huge learning experience for me. And I just went down there not really knowing what to expect or what the terrain or the environment was going to be like, but I just I reached out to a couple of producers that I knew in LA, and one guy was very supportive and he came with me, and it was very rough and ready. It was on a shoestring budget, and we just literally picked up a camera and went and talked to some people that we met, some homeless people in the tunnels. So I mean, that was just a very sort of off the hoof, sort of quite spontaneous project, and of course there was a little bit of planning in it, but it was very much a kind of spontaneous act of just to go and see if it works, what the results would be. So I didn't know what was going to happen or what the effects was going to. So it was just a sort of it was a bit of a trial and error type shoot. But actually, we got some incredible footage, and we're cutting it at the moment. So it was a real kind of exploratory project. So some sort of a top tip or a piece of advice would be just to, there are very inexpensive cameras out there on the market, like the Insta360, and you can start sort of playing around, even in your own bedroom, and just sort of choreographing scenes, and just to kind of make something super simple. And just to have a play in the first instance. And then the second thing I'd say would be the virtual reality film community is so collaborative, and we learn so much from each other. Just on being on this call with Resh, I'm going to probably learn a huge amount listening to what you have to say, Resh. But I would say stick to, keep networking, keep reaching out and joining groups. And just become part of the community, and don't hesitate just to tweet someone or to email someone direct, and just get involved and just ask for help. That's how I've been working.
Yeah. Resh, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think definitely all the things that Avril just said. I think for somebody who's stepping into doing VR right now, or just is extremely curious about it and passionate about it, one of the things I would really, really want people to understand is that those that are creating VR right now, whether it's films that are experiences that are debuting at Sundance right now as we're talking, or whether it's projects for clients, we're all still learning. Like, we literally are still learning every single day. As Ever said, technology moves at such an incredible pace. it's barely impossible to keep up, whether that's new headsets coming to the market, whether that's new cameras coming to the market, whether that's new techniques or new processes. That's kind of happening, and it's almost happening in parallel to another kind of experience where we are looking at, while the technology is all great, how do we use that technology, and how do we create stories with this medium, or how do we create experiences with this medium that really resonate? And in the past 5 years, we've seen a number of like stellar experiences that you can really learn from. So I often have this saying that I say to any kind of new creative or technology developer that joins my team, is that we should stand on the shoulders of giants. We're not learning from scratch, but it is all new, and we should try to absorb and experience as much VR that has already been created, good and bad, to help inform our own opinions of what makes a great VR experience, or to help us imagine and be curious about, well, what if I tried this? And I'll give you a great example. In the early days of VR, about 5 years ago, when we first began creating our first experience, moving somebody or creating any kind of motion in a VR experience was considered like a no-no. Even Oculus in the very early days, they were recommending that VR should be a seated experience.
Yes.
Move forward 6 months, and we broke everything. We broke every possible rule because it's all about experimenting. Definitely take from existing, pioneers in the space. You've got Chris Milk, you've got Felix and Paul, but you've also got some amazing indie filmmakers that are trying new ways, new techniques. And there's so much in filmmaking and storytelling. There's so much in interaction and game design. There's so much in theatre and theatrical performance. And if you kind of bring all of those elements in, there's a magical mix happening here. And I think what excites me is we need new, fresh eyes coming into play, but also something that leans on the experience of these old mediums that have stood the test of time. Storytelling and the principles of a great idea should never change. So keep learning, keep experimenting, and try everything that you can. And I think once you do that, you're not starting from scratch. It doesn't feel like I know nothing. In fact, within a few weeks, you have a wealth of information that you can then use to arm yourself with when you are creating your experience, and test and prototype. And that is the only way we've arrived where we have, is rigorous testing and prototype. And I think it doesn't need to be perfect first time round. You just need to start making something. And once you're in the process of making and mixing and concocting the experience, you suddenly end up in a really interesting space where you want to begin to bring other developers, other makers, VR makers into the mix to have a conversation about, is this working? Is this exciting? Is this right? What do you think? And it's very literal. It's very much one person's experience in a VR piece will be very different to another person's experience in a VR piece. So and hence, just what Avril and I are both just saying now, that's why we're in this space, because it's so exciting.
Yeah.
It's so exciting to be in a space where, I used to have this amazing, the co-founder of AKQA, James Hilton, once said to me, you have to be in the middle of half being completely scared about what you're doing and half being completely excited. When you're right there, then you're onto something great. And I think VR in the past 5 years has really been this roller coaster of being so excited and then completely frightened about how we're actually going to do this, but you're going to work it out somewhere.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that the people who are interested in VR have extremely diverse backgrounds work-wise. So perhaps they haven't tried VR at all and they want to try VR, or they have experimented a little. Do you think that at the moment we can speak of a VR space or a community, and how inclusive is this community for people like that who just decide suddenly to do something in VR?
I mean, my experience has been that the VR community is incredibly supportive, and I've made some really good friends who are doing exactly the same thing as me in this space, and we learn from each other. and we sort of bump into each other at festivals, and we give each other tips and ideas and share about how we kind of overcame certain problems. And I was lucky enough to be in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, a couple of months ago, and I was invited to a VR meetup over there. And some of the guys there were sharing some of their films, and we were sharing tips and ideas, and it's incredibly inclusive and sort of beyond my expectations, really. I come from an advertising background where potentially creatives and agencies don't like to share what they're doing or how they got to certain places, how they crafted their campaign or whatever in the process. But actually in this community it's quite the opposite, and it's very open, I've found.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what Ab was saying. It's a very inclusive community. Everybody wants to see what you're working on, because that spirit of sharing and all being on the same kind of playing field means that we all want to learn from what each other is doing, and we also want to share what's not working, because I think there's nothing better than anyone who's working in the space, and I really get a sense of this in the community. Everybody wants to see everybody's project succeed. Everybody wants, because they want the medium to succeed, and that's very rare. And it feels very much in the spirit of pure artistry, pure collaboration, and no hoarding of ideas. And I hope it remains like that. And whether you are whether you're starting out or whether you are, have been doing multiple VR experiences over a number of years, you want to share and learn and, part with that knowledge with those that are currently in the mix of trying to solve some of those challenges, because you've been right there. And often for me and our team here, I've reached out to multiple creators in the community and brought them in onto projects to help solve some of these challenges. And I think that collaboration is very exciting. It's absolutely what's needed in the industry. And it will continue to remain.
Yeah. A lot of VR actually still has to do with programming and coding, and programming and coding might be intimidating for women sometimes. Do you think that this is something that could change for VR specifically as compared to the games industry, where there is still a difference in terms of how many women coders are there?
I mean, I'm not going to pretend I know anything about code. But I, on my next project that I'm just about to jump into, I'm working with some very, very articulate coders, and who are women, actually. And I don't think it really matters, to be honest, like what gender you are, that it really shouldn't hold you back. I mean, my kind of strong point is ideas and story writing and performance directing. And I like to work with people who are talented regardless of the gender. And obviously that there should not be any kind of barriers to what skill sets you have. And I certainly don't work with people because of their gender. I just love working and collaborating with people who just are really excited and as passionate as I am. And I'm throwing myself into this project about AI, and I don't proclaim to be an expert, but I'm exploring it, and it doesn't hold me back that I'm not an expert in that particular subject, or indeed I'm not skilled enough to create my own code, but I'm gathering a group of people who around me in my production team who are fantastic at different areas.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, because I think there are a tremendous amount of women in the VR space, more so than the advertising space, that's for sure. And I think that's because there's a great mix of the different roles that we are all kind of embracing, and a very collaborative VR team requires you to be a hybrid thinker. Yeah, I think traditionally a lot of the coding roles, Anna, that you're talking about have come from, I remember the early days of us having to even pull a team together.
Yes.
And traditionally a lot of, the game design studios, you saw a lot of shift of talent coming from game design studios and bringing their kind of experience into kind of little VR teams. And a lot of producers adopting the role, female producers adopting the role of producing within a VR team. But I think very quickly what we've also seen is there's a tremendous amount of talent. And when we hire within our creative team, very much to Apple's point, we're just looking for great individuals that can collaborate together and problem solve. Because that is the only way you will get your project to the end goal. And often what we're actually finding is we have to kind of really almost wear many hats. So I often get deep into elements of the code, but not fully coding. And there needs to be a level of knowledge where anybody working within a VR project needs to have an understanding of what it requires code level point of view, or to Apple's point, AI, when you're working with AI and VR, what does that actually mean? What kind of platform do we need to create? What kind of impact does this have on the team? What kind of team do I need to have? We don't need to be all experts at it, but we do need to have a level of understanding of it, so we can understand what our team needs to do to achieve the goals that they do. I think there's an amazing group on Facebook, and I'm going to give them a shout out, which is the Women in VR Facebook group. I remember joining that, about 2 or 3 years ago, and it was amazing joining that. I often post on there, hey, I need a developer, I need a coder, and bam, you have hundreds of women replying back. It's a great community that really promotes and pushes women into the roles that are available, but also showcasing us that we are all out there. We're just not all connected in the ways that we should be, and finding those opportunities for women to be, part of projects that are going on. So that's a great group that if you're not already on that, you should be on that, and 100% men are also welcome to be on that group. I think it's a group that's started by amazing group of women that wanted to connect, and they share all of the events that are happening worldwide, and there's an opportunity then to connect and meet. I think often we have virtual kind of colleagues, friends that we make within the VR space, and the actual time you meet them in reality is a great moment, and that's what it's about. It's connecting with the right people, and when you're on a project or somebody else reaches out to you and says, hey, I need somebody, connecting everybody to each other is really important too. So just diversity in what people know, diversity in the background and experiences is more important than focusing just on gender.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I'd like to add, when I'm going to LA this Friday actually, and I'm just having a look at meetings that I can get involved with, and I find that Meetup is pretty good. And they cover such a vast variety of different groups, from different forms of technology to Bitcoin to AI. They have lots of different types of subjects and themes that they explore. So I'm going to get involved and stuck into some of those meetups. But also, the other thing I'd mention is, Virtual Reality London, VRLO, is pretty top dog. So the UK's largest meetup for immersive technology practitioners. And I also think BAFTA has a VR advisory board that they started a couple of years ago, and they do meetups as well. So there's a lot to get involved with, and obviously film festivals have their own meetups as well. Yes. So just have a little browse on the internet there. I think
absolutely. One I would all of the ones Avril said. I think one I would really recommend, if you guys are over here in New York, when I know that they are planning on launching their first Future of Storytelling in London as well. So Future of Storytelling is a great event. It's like a 3-day event, and it's not just VR. It's basically immersive storytelling. It's a great opportunity to experience VR and AR, but also get very close to the storytellers and the directors and the makers. They have roundtable workshops, they have masterclasses. I myself have run a VR workshop there, and off the back of a VR workshop there, made some of my greatest connections and dearest friends within the VR community. I think what I would suggest is you can go on to, there are a ton of Facebook groups. Don't be afraid to join them. Keep an eye out for the meetups and just go and attend, and slowly you will build your network of people, and you'll begin to see the same familiar faces, and before you know it, you're involved in a project and you'll be on a podcast talking about
Absolutely. Yeah. So because we mentioned film festivals, Raindance had a VR section, and also Estetica Short Film Festival had a VR section and immersive experiences. So you could attend the screenings or the experiences, and then also join panel discussions. So there is a good opportunity for people to meet role models, perhaps future role models.
Encounters also really good panel after that. Yes.
Okay, coming back now a little to VR and the creative side of it, do you think that VR has a future in arts, and what would its role be?
Such a huge question. I mean, yes. I mean, virtual reality touches absolutely every single industry, I believe. It's my opinion. So from everything from the medical professions to to therapy, to healthcare, to theatre, to how we're going to be eating food, the interaction that we have in art galleries, it's just vast, the number of different ways and different industries that this medium is touching. And I definitely think, and it's obviously happening, that artists, young and old, old school artists are exploring in this new medium, and people who are younger and who perhaps haven't ever picked up a paintbrush are exploring in this medium. And what I find fascinating actually is where the body exists in this new medium. And I think that there's been a recent sort of movement towards reincorporating the body into the art, the form of the medium. So one thing that really kind of touched my heart recently, and I will do a shout out because I just thought it was phenomenal, is the Marshmallow Laser Feast work at Saatchi, the Ocean Breeze. Is that what it was called? I'll just double check that. But what I found incredible and quite miraculous about this piece was that the incorporation of the physicality of your body within the experience, and actually to visualize your heart rate and to visualize your breath as you breathe out. It really, for me, it was an incredibly visceral experience that really not only visually stimulated my imagination, but also really centered and focused my physical being within that moment with what I was experiencing visually. And I think that that's, for me, what I'd really love to explore in my next project is actually where does the physical body and how we feel and our the tactile sensory responses that we feel in our physical bodies. I'd like to bring that into my work, and really explore the relationship between how we are in our bodies and how we are in the virtual space. So yes, we live in an ocean of air was the piece, and yeah, I mean, there's so many incredible artists just working in this space, and I'm not going to pretend to know hardly any of them. Like there's just the vast amounts of incredible things happening. and it's just radically changing the way we are as, and I do think that we are evolving as a human species in how we're interacting in so many different industries and different sectors, that it's just such a playground for ideas and exploring. And yeah, I mean, one of my sort of favourite artists from the 70s, Marina Abramovich, has recently, a couple of years ago, she did a piece in bringing an art form into VR. It was a kind of game that would you have to save the world, but she was quite a prominent artist in her own right, a performance artist in the 70s, and now she's kind of making films in the virtual space. So I mean, yeah, it's such a vast space, and there are so many different and new art forms emerging. And also, one other thing, I'll just leave it on this, is the emergence of mixed medium, and actually bringing virtual reality into the theatre space.
Yes.
And combining those different elements, and the use of puppetry, and then also the kind of exploring the corporeal exploration of eating food whilst you're kind of having a dining experience in a virtual space, and bringing the body, the physical sensations of the body and the smells and all of that. I mean, it's just like, I'm so excited.
It is, yes.
It's I think it's super amazing. My answer to your question, in short, is going to be yes. It absolutely is an amazing medium for the art form. I think this side of the pond, we're seeing a tremendous amount of work and effort being placed in showcasing how medium is truly emerging as like a magnificent art form. In fact, a very dear colleague of mine who is an editor for VR Scout has currently just curated a virtual futures exhibition at the LA museum, and it's an amazing, it's called Virtual Futures, and it's an XR showcase. It's curated by Britt and Jesse in LA at LACMA. And what's really great is they're bringing these real creative innovators together to demonstrate how diverse and the range of kind of use and possibilities with VR and art. And that show is actually live and it's running now. And it really is, a great way to bring contemporary culture, the art world, and this technology and this new medium together. And each of the artists explore very different tools for creation, from VR to AR. And it's a very powerful exhibition to allow people to attend and see like the possibilities of it. And we're seeing a number of different, experiences and showcases pop up like this. And I think it's great that people are, we have curators like Jessie bringing all of that together and bringing it all into one space, because that's one of the challenges, is how do we get it out to the mainstream? How do we allow people to see these immersive technologies not as an experience for the few, but as an experience for many? And I think this form of discovery, bringing it to museums, it's going to be a real shift in the paradigm of getting more people to experience it and experience its power. So that's I think absolutely we're seeing a tremendous use, and there are some phenomenal artists that are creating amazing work and using it as a true art form.
So, do you think that VR is accessible? And if not, or is there anything that we could do to improve accessibility to VR?
I think it's been one of the questions that we've had from day one. I think I remember the first time we were trying to sell our VR idea into one of our clients, and one of the first questions they said is, how many people have these devices? And our answer at the time, well, everybody who backed them on Kickstarter, so not many people. And I think the thing is the challenge is it's not mainstream yet. Not everybody has a VR headset in their household, and if they do have one, are they reaching out for that headset on a regular basis? So activation-based events where you can go to a festival or a museum or an art show, or there's a pop-up, or you had in LA, you had the VR IMAX theatres that popped up. I think getting it to people is the biggest challenge at the moment, and having the right amount of content on it, people to want to keep engaging with it, is the biggest challenge, because the technology in the 5-6 years that I've been dabbling in VR has gotten slimmer, faster, and it's cheaper. Earlier on in the days, you were looking at a very hefty $700 to $800 cost just for getting, your first fully high-end headset. And now, you have the Oculus Go, which is retailing at $299. It's phenomenal. So the cost has absolutely come down. I think what people need to see is, why do I need this? What is the purpose for this in my life? And us showing a variety of great content is really going to be the way forward. So the next few years for me are really the years of experimentation and getting out different content that people can really begin to see the purpose of VR and why they would want to use it.
Absolutely. I think it's quite interesting at the moment, because it's sort of like, obviously there isn't a huge infrastructure in place. So, you can't go to a cinema that seats a thousand people, or, we just don't have that set up available. But it will, I believe that it will happen. And it's sort of at the moment, for me, virtual reality is like, it exists more in people's minds than it does the people who've actually been to see it. It's sort of like, there was an incredible show, Sensation exhibition in 1998 at the Saatchi Gallery, that was very high concept works of art that lots of people didn't go and see, but people talked about it because they were high concept pieces. So everyone knows about Damien Hirst's shark in formaldehyde in that tank, because it was talked about a lot, but not as many people saw it as people talked about it. And I think that virtual reality potentially is at that point where people are, it exists in people's vocabulary, and people are talking about it, and the concepts that are being explored are vividly exciting, but not many people have potentially seen that thing. But I think there's going to be a real shift when there's infrastructure in place and people are able to buy more headsets, and it gets cheaper, basically.
Yeah, I think there's also the other end of that, which I think is really interesting. It's often when I'm out doing the talk, when I'm talking to people about experiences, there's a consumer side and the adoption to kind of people buying the headset, but then there's also this hidden side where VR is being used within brands, within companies, in so much more of a useful way, whether that's for therapy or training or education. It's being used in so many categories and so many kind of industries most people are not aware of, because it's not something it's not something that's going to get that PR story or the real estate on a newspaper article, because it's not anything that those brands or that company needs to shout about. But the army have been using VR to treat post-traumatic stress syndrome for many years. In fact, we've taken a lot of learnings from what they've done over the past 15 years and applied that to some of the principles that we've had in projects that we've done. We see a tremendous amount of VR being placed in education and in schools. So you really see it infiltrating and being used in very purposeful ways, but these might not be ways that general Joe public or consumers have ever seen. So I think it's definitely out there, the way people are using it, the way brands are using it, the way the different industries are using it, and even the automotive industry, and using it for training has a huge impact, tremendous impact on individuals and companies, and it really is an engaging and innovative way to shake things up and change the way we teach and learn. So there are interesting barriers on one side, but then there's also this great adoption that is happening on almost like the hidden side that most people potentially haven't seen or heard. And I love surfacing those up and bringing those to the forefront. There's an amazing individual called Sharif Ahmed, who is known as the virtual surgeon. He's kind of the superstar over there. Is part of one of the medical colleges, and has been using VR to help teach and train not only his students but also students from third world countries that are training to be doctors that don't have access to his level of education. So, you know, a tremendous use of it, and I think showing VR as a way to kind of break down some of those barriers and make things more accessible is really interesting.
Definitely. There's a question that's popped up. Has anyone approached VR in terms of studying the relation between an installation space and a virtual space? Very good question, and I've worked on a couple of projects that I've begun to explore the relation between the space and the actual film itself. I directed and wrote a piece. It was a film noir that I shot in 360. It was a kind of sci-fi drama thriller where the viewer is the central detective, and throughout the narrative you have to piece together clues from the different characters who appear throughout the noir film. And I shot that in the Roundhouse Theatre in Camden. Absolutely incredible space, just below the main theatre space. They call it the hub space, and it's sort of dark and it's sort of like a Victorian brick and quite low ceilings. And my intentions were to bring in live performance with viewing the virtual reality film, and having a live audience present watching while people watch the film. And I think there are so many potentials to explore with mixing real performance with with the virtual space that you're watching. And I know that there are so many brilliant artists and filmmakers out there who are doing this already. I mean, the Royal Shakespeare Company are exploring this with using brilliant tech and exploring how to bring that theatre space into and mixing those two worlds. There's another artist, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I also think that the use of augmented reality with performance is something that we're going to see more and more of, and I certainly want to explore in some of my pieces. Just that kind of interplay between what's real and what's not real. There was a thing called Sleep No More. I think that was I didn't see it, unfortunately, but I heard some fantastic reviews, and they certainly were really playing with what you were seeing and what you were thinking that you were seeing, and what was real and what was not real. And there was a film at Venice. And you had to follow a white rabbit, and people have been talking about this. I definitely want to see more of those kind of things, and I definitely want to explore myself. It's really exciting.
I need to come over to here in New York.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. And then one of the cool things about Sleep No More is I've done it multiple times, and every time it's a different feeling and a different experience and a different story. And that Sleep No More has really come from the Punch Drunk team, and they really are exploring this interesting kind of story with immersive theatre, but you very much being part of that story, and that being very personal to you and what you're feeling and what you're doing. And I think a lot of VR experiences that we see have taken lead from the theatrical space, because very much theatrical performers in a way have been working in the 360 space, and that kind of narrative performance and connecting with the audience. There are so many learnings that you can take from there. I've tried a tremendous amount of VR experiences that blur the line between the reality and virtual. I think there are some ones that you can go and try straight away. The Void is an amazing one. They were actually over in the UK over the Christmas period year before last, and they debuted the Star Wars Void VR experience, which is 4 people in a mixed reality experience. There are physical elements that are mapped to what you're seeing in the virtual space, and put the Star Wars story on top of that, and you have a phenomenal phenomenal experience where you come out feeling like you've really not only been part of a story that is so loved, but also that you've impacted the story and now you have a deeper connection with that. The Void are doing some great experiences. They've opened up in Dubai, they are based in LA, they have their experience over here in New York as well, so a number of experiences you see popping up. I think an interesting one, and I think Avril, you'll love this, so we'll have to get you over here to try it, is there's a recent experience called Chained, which actually debuted in New York this Christmas, just Christmas gone, and it was a new take on A Christmas Carol. It was a VR experience, but it had live theatre as part of it, so you went to this venue, there was a Christmas Carol told through with VR, and there were live performers as part of the whole experience. Super interesting. It's kind of really taps into that need and desire where people just want something a little bit different than what you normally experience when you go to a theatre or when you go to the cinema, and people are really hungry and craving for something a little bit more unique, a little bit more challenging, and it requires a lot of the audience, because it requires you to give and pay attention to different type of experience. But I think I really am an absolute believer and very passionate about mapping the digital and virtual together, because reality together, because I think that's when you create a true sense of presence, when people really are connected and grounded in the world that you've transported them into, when they can reach out and physically touch elements. It really kind of cements that story and takes them to a place where they find that once they've taken off the headset, it's very unforgettable. Definitely one of the best experiences was Cannes Arena, which was done by Alejandro Itru, which won him a special Oscar. I've been lucky enough to try it. I'm not sure if you've had the chance to try it. Anyone who has the opportunity to try it, I would really recommend they do it. It's a great it's a great intersection of an amazing human stories of refugees crossing the Mexican border, and really using VR and physical elements as a way to not only transport you there, but make you part of the story, that you feel so connected to what is happening that it has an emotional impact on you. So I think those experiences with installation and virtual space, they're highly impactful when they're done well. And I really am interested to see, very much like what Avril's doing, I want to see more stories that tackle some of those pressing issues, so that we can really get people to connect on an emotional level to some of the things that are happening in the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it seems that virtual reality can make experiences extremely personal, both for the creators, because there's so much decision making in what you're deciding to show, but also for the viewer, because there is such a large engagement on their side. They become present, they become part of that experience. So do you think that there are some ethical challenges there, on the side of the viewer, for instance, or on the side of the creator? Like, how can we tackle the ethical aspects when we create VR content? And have you faced any such challenges in your own work?
I have. I think that unexpectedly so, I think the first film that I made was perhaps one of the most challenging, in terms of how I framed it and how I presented it and the context that I gave around it before I showed it and screened it, and it influenced my decision on where to put it as well. I decided actually not to publish it in the end, because it was just too much of a risk, really, with for people to watch it without having any context around it. So it shows what you go through when you're experiencing an assisted suicide, and actually the amount of interest that it generated was quite shocking. I didn't realise that. I wasn't expecting such an interest from people, but one of the main problems for that film was that people were actually emailing me to watch the film, so that they could make an informed decision on their own lives, and whether they would actually, to make the decision to go to take their own lives at a euthanasia clinic in Switzerland. I had this gentleman contact me, and he told me a little bit of personal background story about that he had an accident skiing, and he'd broken his neck, and he would like to end his life, and he wanted to watch my film to explore, whether that was the right decision or not. And so I'm not certainly not a medical practitioner. I'm not, I'm not a therapist, and I certainly wouldn't be able to advise people. And I didn't make the film to create a piece of marketing, essentially. So I had to be very, very, very aware of, what messages I was sending out, and what audiences were seeing it, and also just be very considerate about how I was presenting it, and essentially it's like an artistic representation of a situation that happens in real life, so it's a documentary drama, but it certainly informed how I make films in the future.
Yes.
And also just because the medium of VR was so young, really, relatively, a couple of years, 3 or 4 years ago, the sort of the novelty value of it was quite strong, and so people would just pick up a headset not knowing what they were about to watch.
Yeah.
And so so I was incredibly aware and had to be very conscious about how I put my film out there, and just to be as informative as I possibly could before people started watching it. The other thing is that the age restriction, and and just being aware of how sensitive the subject matter is incredibly important. And I hadn't really thought about that really in any great depth until it actually came to publishing the film. So that's been very informative for me as a filmmaker.
Yeah.
I think it's so interesting, because I think there are so many ethical dilemmas that we face, so many, with a number of different pieces that you make, and the subject matter and the topics, and I think that we absolutely have many years of learning to do, and we have to be socially and morally responsible for the work that we put out. And even hearing Avril talk about the fact that she decided not to put out the piece, it's such a brave, and I think very but make a lot of VR makers not necessarily going down to that thought process, putting content out there that can effectively, if not done in the right way, have a tremendous impact on the end user. And the question is then, who is responsible for that? What are the morals and the ethics? What are the kind of rules and parameters that we need to be putting around this? Especially when we're kind of all learning on the job, and there's no true science, or there's no true rigorous research that has gone into the effects of someone being in VR and being in a virtual simulation or a virtual scenario, and the impact and the effects that they have. There have been studies in conversation, debate, and I think that the challenge is for us is being aware when you're making a piece of content what the subject matter is, and what can we do to really protect the end user, and what can we do to really make sure that our message gets across, but that we are very mindful and very thoughtful about what we do. User protection should always be key. How do we understand, even when we were doing some of our early experiences, and we had real world physical props and people in a virtual space, we had to navigate around how do we actually keep somebody physically safe when you're in a real space and you're navigating with a VR headset on. How do we keep people safe? How do we keep them orientated? And in some of the early days, there were scenarios where people were physically taking the headset off and being sick because of the experience that they've just had. But that's not an experience that you want anybody to have. And the past few years has been a very, very much a learning experience, not just on the creative level, but also on the level of how do we keep people safe and protected. And I think that has been the same for every single medium that has ever come into play. And I think it will be an ongoing conversation, and very much like the community is talking and sharing, we need to be very mindful of how we are protecting those that are in the experience, and also protecting those that are trying to create these experiences in a way to tell the stories that need to be told.
Yes. I think we're reaching the end of our podcast. Are there any closing remarks that you would like to make?
I mean, I just like to say that I feel like as a creator, I feel like I've struck gold, and this medium, and also the subsequent fallout from this medium, and the new tech that's kind of spinning out of this new medium is just incredible. It's so nourishing. I've been working with so many interesting people that potentially I wouldn't have ever really collaborated with before this was invented. And God knows where it's going to go in the next year. Like, you know, it's just kind of leaps and bounds and just project. And we are writing the future. You know, it's like the only thing that really bounds us is our imagination, and that's fantastic. And I love being there. That's such a brilliant feeling.
It is, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the only thing I will say to anybody who's thinking about, you know, wanting to dabble, and I always call it the dark arts of VR. If you're thinking about dabbling in the dark arts of VR, just do it. Just, you know, there are so many different projects that you can get involved in. There are so many people out there looking for creators, thinkers, and you don't necessarily have to come from a creative or writing background. You can bring all of the skill sets that you have. You just have to be curious, and you have to be passionate about this medium. And I think when those type of individuals come together, you create magic. You ultimately create magic. So get involved. Reach out to myself and Avril. We're here. We're talking to you guys because we want people to be as energized and as thrilled and as scared and as excited as we are to work in this space. So, you know, come and join the party. It's great fun over.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Resh, Sidhu, and thank you, Avril Furness, for your wonderful comments and advice. And thank you for listening to our podcast today. Hope to see you at Real Lives in the coming weeks.